When the Rings of Power teaser trailer dropped, they expected to silence the fans, but they couldn't, because the backlash was so massive and so uniform, even across an international basis, that they simply couldn't frame it in a certain way that made any sense. But then the journalists and academia start to come out, and they try different framing techniques to see if they can find one that sticks. And then if one does, you can bet your bottom dollar that that will be downloaded everywhere in the latest patch. And there's so many great pieces about this article. Like, one of my favorite things is that it starts with the word opinion, because this is an opinion piece, and obviously when you write an opinion piece, it means that you don't have to worry about such pesky things like facts and reality. But obviously Tolkien and Lord of the Rings is a massive part of British heritage and culture. And when I think of British culture, who do I think contributes to that the most, has the most wide breadth of experience that know why that's important and why it needs to be protected? And obviously the people forefront of my mind, it has to be students. Yes, students definitely know all about British culture. I have to say, when I was a student, I think the biggest cultural moment that I actually had was being on my knees drinking beer out of a funnel and trying to work out how much I could drink before I actually had to breathe again. And if those kind of qualifications don't give someone the right to critique culture, then quite frankly, I don't know what does. And obviously, if we're going to talk about what's great about Britain and what should be kept or destroyed, then I would expect to always consult someone who's from China. But it's not as if they don't understand the significance of Tolkien's work. So it says, in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien consolidated and popularized things like elves, dwarves, and the Dark Lord, and these have ingrained themselves into humanity's collective cultural psyche. You'd think something that major and important would need to be preserved. Apparently not, no. Something that's deeply ingrained into humanity's cultural psyche must be destroyed. We're going to find out why, apparently. This basically talks about how expensive the works are and how they need to be successful and popular. Now, considering Lord of the Rings is already popular, you'd think that just repeating that on the screen would obviously be your key gateway to success, with its built-in fan base that will definitely make you your money back because it's already been proven to do it in the past. Or you can destroy all that, change everything, and just roll the dice on a new IP that you have no idea whether it'll succeed or not. I don't know, I mean, risk management kind of puts you towards one side of the argument, doesn't it? Well, the upcoming Amazon series has sparked considerable excitement from fans and critics alike. Honestly, mainly critics. Critics love it, fans not so much, and that's if I'm being generous. The Rings of Power marks the first time that non-canonical actors will portray prominent characters in Tolkien's cinematic adaptations. Arondir and Disa, played respectively by people, will be the first non-canonical elf and dwarf on the screen. And look, anyone that's actually looking at the screen will know that those weren't the words that were said. But it is what they mean, and it is what they're talking about. This is someone that is complaining that these people will be the first people that will break the canon and break the law, and people are mad about that. And it doesn't matter what words you try and replace that with, that is what you mean, because that is what everyone else is talking about, and trying to misframe it with different language that you prefer to use because you think that carries more weight is not only incredibly disingenuous and done in extremely bad faith, but it's also incredibly transparent and makes you look like a bit of a div. When you think you can use different words that are like magic spells to give your argument more weight, all you have to do is take the words away from them and they're left floundering on the ground like a fish out of water. This casting decision, however, has antagonized Lord of the Rings fans who argue that destroying the characters undermines the authenticity out of the adaptation. And I think that sentence basically speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's amazing how when you replace the words that they try and frame something as the words they actually mean, suddenly there's nothing wrong with the sentence. Yes, it turns out that if you argue that destroying canon undermines the authenticity of the adaptation, of course it does. Non-canonical characters make something not canon. It makes it not the story. It makes it not Lord of the Rings. Thousands, we can at least say tens of thousands, it was like 89 last time I saw it, vented their frustration by reposting an ironically misattributed quote, which Nerdrotic already proved that isn't correct by literally putting in his video the actual quote. I mean, you are an academic student. You should understand the different forms of quotations, including that of paraphrasing. Unsurprisingly, the most viewed trailer reaction videos from independent YouTube channels, we've got to go after the YouTube channels here, almost unanimously decry the decision, their bitterness matched only by the overwhelming unison of their disapproval in the comment section. And I'm sure they think that this is a real great own. It actually completely destroys anything they can possibly say. Because If something is almost unanimous, this is overwhelming unison of their voice, and all of these people, they're not influenced by anyone. This wasn't some major campaign. There was no massive marketing push. In fact, all of that went in the opposite direction. And yet all of these people watched the trailer and made the same decision independently in an almost unanimous, uniform decision. If you're ever in a place where everyone uniquely and individually decides something and you disagree, it's probably your fault. It probably is. Not every time, just almost unanimously it is. This collective frustration reflects a misinterpretation of Tolkien. And this is one of the things you'll see. People are, it's a misinterpretation. It's there in black and white. It's ink on a book. You can actually read the paper for yourself, and it's obvious. It's stated. It's written down. If you have to interpret it, you're the one getting it wrong. You're the one changing things. That's how we know you are changing it. And this, if left unchecked, gatekeeps the fantasy classic within a stringently racialized framework. So, what they're saying there is that people want to gatekeep the fantasy classic so that the elves remain elves, the dwarves remain dwarves, and the humans remain human. We can have the orcs remaining orcs and any other things you want to do. Shall the hobbits turn into smurfs? No, I think we'll just keep them as hobbits, eh? Shall we make Sauron a vending machine? No, let's leave him as Sauron. The vending machines, they can have their own little place in the world if they really want. Those lamenting the supposed destruction of canon follow a similar thread. They often begin their polemic. Polemic? Seriously. Look, you don't find me calling your article a diatribe, but it's just as accurate. By pointing out that Lord of the Rings and other source materials composed by Tolkien contain occasional references to pale skin tone of elves. So in other words, Lord of the Rings contain references that say the skin tone of elves and Númenóreans. Job done then. Next. Those decrying the upcoming show back up their arguments with different versions of "because Tolkien said so." I can't imagine writing that in a piece and thinking that that's an argument. I tell you, when I was younger, I was a complete and utter know-it-all prat, and it hasn't all left. I was never like this. I was never this, but I've never seen an argument that this, oh my god, who would have thought Tolkien said something and other people are using it as a justification of what Tolkien meant? How dare you accuse other people of misinterpreting Tolkien when you then, a paragraph later, admit that you actually think his opinion is irrelevant about his own work? What on earth do you think you're doing that gives you the right to overrule the creator of a work who spent his lifetime thinking about it, writing it, creating it, and you then you have the nerve to accuse other people of being against that, trying to use his legacy for your own argument, and then going, actually, none of that matters, I don't care about it at all, I just want it destroyed. And we don't even start there, because not only have we had two different opinions in 2 paragraphs, this guy actually manages to fit in a third. It's almost like none of this is actually a genuinely held belief. These aren't opinions that he holds, they're just masks and costumes that he's trying on for size to see if one looks good in the mirror that might possibly convince people. And then you can guarantee that if any of them did, that would be the one that was held into the future and used and downloaded as a patch across everybody else. And then we have a repetition of the worst arguments that I saw on Twitter and was amazed anyone would write, from the Tolkien professor, and we've got it again. Did Tolkien really intend this? The answer is a resounding no. Well, if it's resounding, you're going to have some hell of a proof, I tell you. From a technical standpoint, yes, technically correct, the best form of correct, sporadic references to certain characters cannot preclude the possibility that non-white characters exist. Well, the great thing about canon is, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist, therefore it can't exist, because it wasn't written down. That's literally what canon means. If Tolkien didn't write it, it's not canon. It isn't. He wrote the books. Anything else is just a gap where, yeah, you can write something in it, but it's just you making up some nonsense. This applies to Arondir and Disa, who the show created and do not appear in Tolkien's original work. And so if they don't appear in his work, then it's not actually Lord of the Rings, is it? No, at best you can call it fan fiction, except none of you are fans, so you just left with fiction, generic fiction. And all you're doing is you're taking the Lord of the Rings name and stamping it on generic fiction and calling it Lord of the Rings because you want some money. And turns out the people that like Lord of the Rings wanted Lord of the Rings. But you're so busy trying to convince people to swallow down some sewage that they don't actually want, for some reason, you're not listening to the people. I mean, you did say how much the show cost at the start. If you wanted it back, maybe you should listen to the people who were trying to give you the money. This is an argument where they're literally saying that the characters in Lord of the Rings aren't actually important. And you can change all of those characters to be other characters, and the Lord of the Rings will still be the Lord of the Rings. Which is obvious nonsense. In fact, he even goes as far as to say you could change all of the characters because only the main part of the story matters, which is about Sauron and Sam and Frodo. And so you could basically change anyone else and it'd be fine. Yeah, apparently only the core of something works. As long as you've got the actual main bit of it, then it's fine. Right. Because you could even take something like Doctor Who, couldn't you? You could take Doctor Who and then you could change the Doctor and all of the companions. And then you could just put random other people in and it would always remain exactly the same, season after season after season. Because the characters in a piece don't work, does it? No, as long as you got the core things like the TARDIS and the screwdriver, it's obviously the same. I mean, just even making the argument that you can change the characters of a piece and it will stay the same as long as you maintain the core plot is so ridiculous and obviously untrue that it cannot be made in good faith. You have to either be incredibly ignorant about the topic or lying. There's no other option there. The sentences in this are amazing. That's why I like to autocorrect these kind of things. Because if you actually remove their false lying framing and replace it with what everyone is actually talking about, the facts of the piece, you end up with some incredible sentences like this. So we see how absurd the backlash against the Rings of Power truly is. It pretends that canon, an unimportant detail at best and non-existent imagination at worst, is an indispensable part of Tolkien's work. It pretends that canon is an indispensable part of Tolkien's work. Of course it is, because without the canon, it's not Tolkien's work. Amazing. Then we get their final bizarre, deranged argument that just makes no sense and tries to claw in every weird topic and buzzword they can possibly think of to try and slander anyone that would dare speak out against the complete nonsense that they've written in the rest of the piece. This is literally just trying to actually defame people's good name and going, oh, well, if you talk about this, then you must be this. If you're not above this is what you actually have to go into as part of your academic piece, then congratulations and good luck in the rest of your life, because it may get you far in certain circles of academia, but it won't get you far among actual decent human beings as a part of life. Beneath the facade of preserving authenticity lies a dangerous misinterpretation of Tolkien that carries real-world significance. Dear, if you go round saying that the elves have real-world significance on your life, you will end up in a white padded room. For very good reason. No, the elves aren't coming to get you, and people saying that the elves must actually stick to canon aren't going to have any real-world effects. You don't have to worry about the elves. They're not a danger to you. There's nothing to be scared of. The elves are just the elves. It's part of fantasy. You'll be fine. It's fine. You're perfectly safe. The elves aren't in the room with us now. What real-world significance of a fantasy novel? A completely and utterly deranged rant. My favorite piece about that article is not only are the arguments awful and contradict themselves, because they're not genuinely their opinion, they're just trying them on for size to see which one they think actually, when they're sort of saying it out loud and presenting it to an audience, works. It's like a stand-up comic. When they go into a stand-up show or you see their DVD, that's hours of work. But what you don't see is all the time they spent in comedy clubs trying that out on audiences before, and they drop the ones that don't work and keep the ones that do. So when they actually present it in the end game, they've got a very fine, polished, and strong piece of work. And that's what this is. This is someone trying out various different arguments that all contradict each other, but it doesn't matter. They're simply saying them out loud, presenting to people, and trying to get feedback, so that they can take these, improve on them, and come back with stronger arguments later on. But my favourite part of it is if you keep this on topic, none of them work. Like, you can just take this all at face value, and when they're like, oh, well, it's the backlash against this, and you're like, well, that's not what the backlash is about, is it? People just want you to stick to canon. Don't change canon. And as long as you replace the phrases that they're trying to use because it insinuates another meaning, so they can go, oh no, people will be scared to talk about that. It's all about trying to silence people. If you actually just replace them with the words which are the factual, objective problems that people have with the piece, suddenly all of this becomes complete and utter nonsense and has no power behind it at all. And that is the power of framing. That is what they all try and do. Or we want to take something that's true and then rephrase it, change the words so they have some kind of deeper meaning behind them, and use that meaning to beat them over the head with it. And when someone tries to beat you with a stick, if you take the stick away, suddenly they lose all power, and they just become the cowering child, desperately trying to use words which aren't part of the normal human lexicon. Oh, it's polemic. Oh, in their polemic. Yeah, in your diatribe. It's like, words don't intimidate me, love. So, there's no point trying to prove, I'm a student, I'm part of academia. Yeah, there's a reason why I sneer at academia and journalists, and it's because they do things like this. Because actually, they're so busy trying to be in their own head, they're so busy trying to frame things and change things, that they actually lose sight of the actual problem. That they don't care about the truth anymore. And it turns out that the truth carries more weight, which is why they always have to change it from what people are actually talking about, from the truth, from facts, into their own fiction, their own language, trying to reframe it and move it into their world. Because when they're in their own world, in their own framing, that's where they have all the power, that's where they think they can win. You just have to not play the game. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.